In recent years, we've seen the California legislature come out in an all-out blitz on Second Amendment legislation. 2025 seems to be starting at a little bit of a crawl. Let's talk about it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel today. It is January 2025. The legislation season has begun. We all held our breath and it kind of feels like we're still holding it. To walk us through that, we've brought back on Rick Travis. He is the legislative director for CRPA. He's also the host of Firing Line Radio on AM 590 The Answer. You can catch him there on Saturdays at 1 p.m. Rick, thanks for being on with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And before we get into that, guys, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. It's a great way to work the algorithms to get this information as far out as it can possibly go. It's also a great way for you to directly contribute to the litigative and legislative efforts that we put forth in California. So, Rick, let's just jump right into it. You know, you go on Legiscan and you look for all the new bills, and this is kind of what you're met with. Jacob, if you could pull this up for us. The first one I was able to come across was Senate Bill 15, introduced by Senator Blake Spear on gun violence prevention, and it reads like this. Existing law prohibits certain actions relating to the sale, possession, storage, and carrying of firearms. Existing law authorizes a court to issue a temporary gun violence restraining order prohibiting a person from possessing a firearm or ammunition if there is reasonable cause to believe that a person poses a significant danger or harm to themselves or other persons by having a firearm. This bill would state the intent of the legislature to enact legislation relating to gun violence prevention. So, Rick, I guess I got to ask, as a lobbyist, how do you even advocate against something like this? Do we just have to wait for more meaningful language to come out later? What is it that you can even do when all that they say is we intend to enact legislation, that would, affect the Second Amendment in California?
So the easy answer would be to say what most people would tell you in the building, no matter who they lobbied for or what their subject matter is. This is called a placeholder bill, in which the member, in this case, Senator Blake Spear, was looking to, quote, get a low number or a number that she liked, such as 15, and say, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And then later on, probably sometime in February, she would flesh this bill out. Maybe not. Maybe she holds it up towards the deadline in May when a bill in the Senate would have to move to a bill in the Assembly. Maybe she uses this as a place marker to get an amend to something completely outside of our area. So you have to ask yourself, when did she file this bill and what was her purpose in doing so? And she filed this bill, as you know, we had a special session that the governor called together back in December that lasted less than 2 days. That's when she filed this bill, Kevin. And that bill happened to come on the end of the campaign season. And so, there's a good cause to believe that maybe she put this bill out so that some of the groups like Moms Demand Action and others would see her as being anti-Second Amendment, anti-gun ownership, and therefore would contribute to her campaign so she could pay off some of her campaign expenses or prep for her new campaign. So a lot of times, even though they will deny it vehemently, that's what's going on in the background. This is a bill that, obviously it's on our watch list. I'm looking at it. But, over the past few years, we've had several bills that were similar to this, and they actually got gutted and amended and went to become water bills, transportation bills, healthcare bills. So gun amendments go both ways, which is why we have to look across the board for others. And so often when you and I talk and I say, oh, there's like 150 potential gun amends, technically any bill can be gutted and amended, but these are like placeholder bills. They're more susceptible to that action. The other issue I would tell you too is right now, this year is completely different from years past in that, and generally speaking, there was an arbitrary number of up to 5,000 bills could be introduced in a session. We have a 2-year session, which meant every member had about 50 bills. But that wasn't a limit. That was a guideline, because beyond that, we had some members that went 55, 60 bills, like they could go over. Both the Senate Majority Leader and Assembly Majority Leaders, both Democrats, limited that to 3,500. So they did about a 33% cut. in the number of bills that get introduced. And so a lot of members now are looking at like, oh, that's 35, so I might only do 15, 16 bills this year. So we've seen a trickle because normally by this point, as you know, we're like usually talking like there's 20 new bills and climbing. And right now we only have one firearms bill, and it's the one you mentioned. Um, we will see more. I know we're going to see more. That's not, don't go run around, start clapping, going, oh, there's no gun bills this year. No, that's not going to be the case at all. But these are going to be very targeted. And we also have a state that's got budget crisis. We have the fires of this week that are going to create crises and hurts on that budget because a lot of people are losing a lot of property, a lot of homes, a lot of damage, things like that. So um, and we're seeing the vernacular. It's going to be curious to see how it changes in our area, but climate change is just one example of something we've heard for the better part of a decade and a half in the capital. Yeah, you don't even hear climate change. That has now become clean air and clean water, Kevin. So, we're seeing a lot of things change that way. And so, in one way they don't, but in another way they do.
So I guess to put a bow on that, as far as the words in this bill, it's not necessarily something out of the ordinary. We've seen this before, so we're gonna wait, and like you said, it'll either get flushed out or it'll become a gut and amend. I'm curious what your thoughts are with a more limited number of bills that anybody can create this year. Do you see the pendulum swinging more towards things like gut and amends, or more towards a bill that is thoughtfully created that tries to get pushed through as is throughout the session?
Well, I don't think we're going to see gun amends go away in the near future. But I do feel that there will be some members that will set something up this like Blake Spear has. For areas that they want to be ready to be very quick to move. So the advantage of having, if there is any advantage to a member of having a gut and amendable bill, is that they can pivot if there's something that happens to their constituency very quickly. So, for example, she has a lot of the coastline in her district. If there was some coastal issue that she needed to handle, she could very quickly not exceed her number of bills, gun amend this to something like that, and be able to deal with it, please her constituents and stuff like that. So, as far as seeing gun amendments go away, no. Obviously, if there was a major negative incident within our community, we would see several gun amends probably within 72 hours or less, I would imagine, be changed over to something that we wouldn't like or care for, and then would have to fight. As far as what I'm seeing currently on both sides of the aisle, yes, I'm seeing much more thoughtful, slow of pace, really reasoning, really talking out. There have been several bills that we would not have liked to have seen in the Capitol that aren't coming our way because there's been conversations going on for the past week and a half between staff and our office and allied offices that, yeah, okay, yeah, that's just, yeah, we're not going to do that. And so that's a positive sign. We don't get to grandstand on it or say anything because there's no point in that. But yeah, I see a lot of things, and we have a couple bills that right now are being researched to see if they get a number assigned to them. And it's been a much more thoughtful process than in years past.
So we've got some new rules that are, forcing a little bit of a process change up there. We also had the Trump administration or the election happen last year, causing an emergency session here in California. Any residuals from that we're seeing kind of translate into the early 25-26 session? Are you seeing anything worth pointing out as kind of a consequence of that?
I don't think the governor has quite the stranglehold he did in years past. I mean, he is a lame duck governor. He's in the last 2 years not able to run for reelection. That always has a play on any governor, not just Newsom. We've also seen both as I said earlier, the Speaker of the Senate and the Speaker of the Assembly assert more independence and have pushed back. And we certainly saw that during the session. They said, hey, yeah, we'll look at this, we'll look at that, but we're going to handle this in our own houses. They weren't just taking marching orders. So I think that's going to be a change that we'll see have lots of residual impacts, not just for gun owners, but for Californians in general. I also feel that one of the things that we have is we have a huge incoming freshman class that is hugely aware of the impact of Donald Trump and the impact of the propositions going the way they did, which was a pushback against a lot of the progressive policies that had been placed here in the Capitol. We've seen some changes in the leadership of strategic committees. One of those would be Assembly Public Safety. Reggie Jones Sawyer had ran that committee with a iron fist for years towards a progressive left, a severe progressive left. We have a Democrat in charge, but I think you're going to see that come more to center left because that person is a former prosecutor and wants to hear both sides, is already reaching out to both sides to say, hey, I want both sides of the table and I want the dais to actually have to listen to both sides. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of things that are changing. We have to see how much of this is lip service and how much of it isn't. But at this point, early in January of 2025, I'm a little jaded, Kevin, but I'm also hopeful.
Well, it's never a bad thing to see a little bit of optimism that you can look forward to, especially when we have the supermajority that we have. Who knows how much longer that supermajority is going to be there, as we're kind of starting to see the tide turn the other way. Obviously, with a lot of work that we're doing, as well as other organizations to get rid of that supermajority. Definitely something that we're going to follow along with, though. You guys, please be on the lookout because the alerts start coming when the legislation gets real. We're going to be sending them out. There are ways that we're going to be able to advocate against this legislation when it hits committees, when it hits the governor's desk. If it hits the governor's desk, hopefully it doesn't. But with the limited amount of legislation that's come out so far and the way it's trickling, Rick, I wanted to get your opinion on something else. As many of you may know,
I want to go back to something you just said, Kevin. I want to make sure people understand something. You are absolutely right. The work that has been done by your grassroots section and by one of our other co-workers in the election process has been tremendous, along with a lot of our allies. The idea of the supermajority does not have the power it once had. It still has power. It's still there. Like, I'm not saying it's not there, but we're already starting to see on several issues, there is a good chunk of Democrats that are like, because a lot of these elections were less than a couple thousand votes, as you know. And so they are not as willing to just follow the party dogma. They are looking at what their constituents want because job one after being reelected is start your new election campaign.
Yep.
And so they are sensitive to that. And so we've had some offices that haven't always been friendly who have reached out and said, hey, let's talk, let's discuss. And so I'm not saying those members are going to vote for us, but a lot of those members in the supermajority might not vote, and not voting allows them to save political face, but it also means the bill dies.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before. That is definitely something worth considering as a victory when they don't vote. So absolutely, probably going to have many videos this year with you coming on talking about that legislation, how we can advocate against it. Obviously, the work needs to be done on both ends. Obviously, appreciate the work that you're doing up in the Capitol as well. So we're going to continue and work with you on that. But this I saw might catch your eye as well. I know that you do a lot of work with the Wildlife Conservation Coalition, having helped put it together and being a leader in that space as well, which you guys really is the biggest and the most influential coalition of conservation organizations that this state has ever seen. Rick, I'm sure that you can make an argument for the West Coast of the United States, not even in California. It's drawn a lot of ire in the last couple of years, or it's drawn a lot of attention rather in the last couple of years as an example. That might be replicated in other areas of the country. But I saw this article and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. Of course, Jimmy Carter passed away at the end of last year, just a couple of weeks ago. It seems like Bass Pro is going to do something about it. Jacob, can you pull this article up for me really quick? It goes. This is from the Outdoor Wire. It goes like this. Johnny Morris and Bass Pro Shops have announced a $1 million conservation pledge to support conservation causes President Jimmy Carter championed for many years, all aimed to help introduce more kids to the joy of fishing, hunting, and the great outdoors. The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is honored to be a part of the disbursement of these dollars to support wildlife law enforcement. Other conservation organizations benefiting from this support include American Wetlands Trust, National Wild Turkey Federation, Vamos a Pescar Education Fund, and Gateway to Fishing Program. Among President Carter's many accomplishments, some of his notable conservation achievements include the implementation of the 1978 National Parks and Recreation Act, his wildlife law enforcement initiative, eliminating obstacles inhibiting enforcement efforts of the Carter Amendments to the Clean Water Act, focused on preserving and restoring natural values of wetlands and floodplains. I mean, this looks like a net win, Rick. Bass Pro stepping up to really try and put some money into the conservation community in the United States overall. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this and how we can see potentially an impact here in California.
So it's fortunate and unfortunate at the same time. It's fortunate that Jimmy Carter is being recognized. There are obviously, I'm filled with a lot of our viewership, maybe not their favorite president, but in the wildlife conservation space and hunting space, he was a person that did champion our ideals and our values, did push for that, was a smart man when it came to especially upland game and waterfowl hunting, as well as some of the big game like deer, of what was necessary to keep that resource vibrant and sustainable and passable to future generations. Unfortunately, a lot of Democrats that like to uphold Jimmy Carter don't follow that same logic. I would even argue Sacramento doesn't. And that would be like if you were to look at the groundwater issues here in California, Jimmy Carter realized you got to leave water on top of the ground. It creates wetlands because that refills the aquifers, which gives you water for future resources, for farming, residential properties, et cetera, et cetera. That is a struggle here in this state. That is a hotly contended area. And so, like last year, as you know, Kevin, we had incredible rains in California, but the vast majority of that water got diverted straight back out into the ocean. Where had it been allowed to lay on the ground, you would have had wetlands where you would have had more birds and waterfowl and wildlife being able to grab that water. That water trickles down to the aquifers, gets naturally filtered, and is there for a not so rainy year like we're already starting to experience in this La Nina episode, where we have fires raging around us in January, which is not normal in California. And so, to Carter's credit, he understood that, which some of our people don't. To Bass Pro's credit, they're honoring that and are using this as a reason to put money out there. Well, we see some of it, a small part of it, but what I think we have to be is smart enough to realize that, and we've learned this through research done here in California. We used to think that the ducks that flew out of the Sacramento Delta in Southern California went north for winter, true, and then we'd park it somewhere up near the Arctic Circle and then come right back home. And there was one duck, I can't remember the duck's name, but we were able to band it and tag it at a very young age and got to watch it for 7 years. And the adage and idea that the duck flew just one direction back, that little girl flew back up to the Arctic and then flew down to Louisiana and checked out Louisiana one year, flew back, then flew down to Texas one year, then flew back down to California. Like, she toured the United States. And so, what we do in other states does have an impact on the wildlife that comes to California. So I think in that extent, this would be applicable.
Yeah, and you gotta call it a net positive. So, good on them. It seems like they have always been devoted to conservation efforts, especially in our communication with them as well. So it's definitely good to see that. I guess overall, Rick, specifically on the legislature, what are your final thoughts? We're at the start of 2025 finally. What's the outlook that you have for this year?
I think there's going to be some huge challenges. We're going to see some bills that are going to come out trying to reverse some of the things of the past. We're going to see some bills come out of our community that are designed to help everybody along the way. I think there's going to be a lot of tough things that we can unpack on future episodes that are going to be hard for people to understand. But I will say this: in our community, to those of you that aren't on the conservation hunting side, you just want to be able to go to the range and shoot your firearms. all the things that you're upset with, like range access, ammunition costs, CCW, Senate Bill 2, the recent tax. Totally get it. We're fighting those things, but understand just as egregious things have happened on the hunting and conservation side of the house. We are in a position where it is, if we don't get some things to happen, we're going to lose some iconic species here in California forever. They're going to go extinct. And so we have a system that's out of balance that's got to be brought in, and some hard decisions are going to have to be made. And educating the public property is going to be a major part of what we're doing.
Yeah, and we're certainly waging on all of those war fronts, which is why we ask everybody to subscribe, get the message out. We could use as much help from advocates as we can possibly get. Well, Rick, I appreciate you. I look forward to having you on in the future, but more so, thank you for coming on today and sharing with us.
It's always a pleasure to help out.
Absolutely. And guys, if you like content like this and you want to continue to see more, please, once again, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. Really helps with the algorithms to get this information as far and wide as possible. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you on the next one.